Alright guys, let's hop into it. One of the best rogue builds this season is, of course, the HeartSeeker build. This is going to be the push variant, meaning that it's mainly geared to push the higher tiers of the pit. I do have a more beginner-friendly one. If you guys want to check that out, I will also pin that down below. But the differences between the more casual-friendly one and the one that is actually rank 1 actually has to do with getting a little bit more damage while sacrificing some survivability, but that is totally up to you. But I highly recommend, if you are more of a casual/beginner, check out the other previous one, as this one again is more so geared towards the higher tiers of the pit. We'll start off with some Sigil 100 gameplay, we'll do some pit gameplay, we'll do with and without Holy Bolt so you guys can kind of see the difference in gameplay. Honestly, what it really comes down to is we're going to get more damage, but we will have to kind of activate other things. So again, it's not necessarily as casual friendly, but it does get more damage at the end of the day, and you need a lot of damage if you're doing the high tiers of the pit. So for starters, let's go ahead and go over the skills, then we'll go over the aspects, some of the more important things to roll, and then we'll go over the skill tree as well as the Paragon Board, as it is technically different than the more casual friendly one. So starting right off, obviously HeartSeeker, we're going to be using that to deal our damage. That's kind of a no-brainer. Then we are running Smoke Grenade to get even more damage. Then we are running Caltrops. We're going to actually utilize this to get even more damage. And then you have some options here. You can play Concealment, so you can have even more survivability, or you can run Poison Trap to essentially knock down the enemies and also get more damage with this. So there's a lot of different things that you can play here, and I also made a small little note over here. If you want to, you can also run Retribution, because currently this is double dipping. If this does get patched, then you may want to swap that, but as of right now, double dipping meaning that it's actually activating more times than it should, or you can actually run Frostbitten as well. So other options that are all within the top spots in terms of the ladder pushing leaderboard at the moment. But I really personally think Poison Trap is good because it not only gives you extra survivability, but it also gives you damage because it just instantly knocks down the enemies, which is quite helpful. And then Dash, so you can move out of specifically the pit bosses when they do certain abilities. It's just nice to kind of dash out of the way. And then one of the best things in the game for this build is actually Shadow Step. Another bonus tip for like high tier level pushes is Shadow Step does not actually reset inner calm. So you can sit there shooting continuously, and when something comes up like a AoE or something, you can actually shadow step behind the boss and continuously fire, and that will not break your inner calm. That is key to getting actually more DPS. As far as the specialization, inner sight, you want that extra crit so you can knock down the enemies. When you hit a dazed enemy, you get more crit over there, and of course when things are knocked down, you can get more damage as well as apply other crowd control effects. So for starters, obviously you're running Hollow Conquest. This is an endgame push build. You should have it by then. If not, again, recommend check out my more casual friendly build, as this one's mainly meant to push in the higher tiers of the pit. You can easily, if you do masterwork, 12 out of 12. I don't have everything perfect in the gameplay, but once you get everything 12 out of 12, you will be able to dominate content. We're going to actually slowly ramp up, and you can definitely tell the gameplay difference as we start climbing higher in the pit. Things just essentially just are going to be a little bit harder with the amount of damage that they deal in terms of how hard they hit. But the build does quite a bit of damage up until I'd say like 80-ish. Then the kills may be a little bit slower here. But nonetheless, Umbrous Aspect, you definitely need to get ranks of Dark Shroud if you want to go and push higher in the pit. This has to be absolutely getting not only Masterwork, but you need the greater affix on that. Then the rest, like Resistances, are fine. Then Concussive Strikes to get even more damage. Getting Vormal damage on like every single piece of gear is really key to get those high damage hits with, of course, the Victimize to actually proc. And then we're running the Aspect of Might, and you may need to get greater affix on armor in a lot of cases. That way you don't have to run Juggernaut or anything. It just really helps out. And then the other thing that's really important here is to get the ranks to HeartSeeker greater affix. That is key to getting your high damage. These are very expensive if you want to get like multiple greater affixes, specifically in armor or in to HeartSeeker. And then Shared Misery is excellent, but there's a few other options if you want to. Again, Retribution, Frostbitten, all great. Again, this is technically not working as intended, but nonetheless, the higher tiers, the pushes are going to always utilize whatever is the best at the moment. So if that does get patched, just keep in mind you may want to not run that because it's basically getting more stats than it should. And then we are running Aspect of Moonrise. You want this in your two-handed, and you really want that greater affix on that vulnerable damage. And every single piece of gear, it is absolutely key, again, if you really want to start pushing higher. We'll start off with 50 and then we'll go higher. And the next up, Adaptability, is just going to give you extra damage here, but the main important thing is getting those ranks to exploit, frigid finesse, malice. That is key to actually getting those high damage. I get asked all the time, how come yours hits way more damage than mine? And mine doesn't even hit for nearly the same amount as like the rank 1 players. And that is because you need to get those master workings done. You need to hit those high levels of all of the things on your amulet. This is where the build kind of separates the people that are like, oh, I only play, 2 hours, 3 hours a day versus the people that can play 30 hours a day. The amulet is absolutely the key to unlocking those big damage numbers. And then we're also running Edge Masters, really good as well, just get more damage. And then Elements, more damage as well. And then Intercom, this is actually really good because this also double dips. And then also Rapid Aspect, so we get more attack speed. The important things on every single piece of gear are attack speed, crit strike chance, as well as getting the vulnerable damage. All those are great. As well as getting Lucky Hit. You need to get that as well. I marked it on some. You don't need to get specifically Lucky Hit in rings. You can get it on your gloves. You can get it in your amulet. You can get a lot of different things in other places, but the main thing specifically is to get that. And then as far as the gems go, this is where it gets a little bit different from the non-push builds. So Sapphire is pretty normal. And then we have Emeralds and Armor. So you lose out on survivability, but you gain DPS. That's the difference here. Again, it's not very beginner friendly, but again, this is for like the highest tier pushing and pretty much the best build in the game. As far as the skill tree goes, it's pretty much the same. I actually really like running Poison Trap. Now you see I don't have points into it over here. You can get it with Harlequin, but you usually do want to put points into the knockdown. So it's just basically 2 points in here if you want to run the Poison Trap one. If you want to run the concealment version, that is another option as well. Smoke Grenade can also give you extra damage and you can reduce the cooldown. It's kind of up to you what you want, so play around with what you like the most. I would suggest trying out both. Poison Trap with knockdown is my personal favorite, but I know a lot of people like concealment because it actually removes unit collision, so when you get stuck in those situations where you normally would die, well, it really helps out. And then you have to max out the ranks of Dark Shroud. This is how you become way tankier. And then we just have Frigid Finesse over here, and then the standard, like you just grab Haste, and obviously you need to run Victimize. It's literally part of this season. And then as far as the Paragon board, this is where it gets a lot different. So we can start off on Ranger for the starter board, and then we go and make this a lot bigger here so you guys can see it. And then we are running on the second board at Exploit Weakness, and we want to run Pride. It has to be here because it gives you a bonus to the vulnerable damage. And then on the third board, we're going to be running Cutting Stratagem / Chip. And then on the fourth one, we run Note Witness and Exploit. The reason why Exploit needs to be over here is because you're going to get that bonus with Strength, and you want to scale as much vulnerable damage as possible. And then we are going to go back to the second board and go into number 5, which is going to be Cheap Shot Devious. So it's going to give you more damage over here when you hit those crowd-controlled enemies. A lot of times you'll see on the boss fights, once that boss is staggered is how you're going to get your insane amount of damage. And at this point, this is still a really low tier over here, but eventually once you start climbing up, your big damage really comes down to when the boss is actually going to be staggered. But yeah, that's going to give you way more damage over there, especially if the boss spawns in some ads. And then from Cheap Shot Devious, you want to go into Leirana's Instinct with Control over here. This is how you're going to get extra damage to crowd control. And then this is where the board gets a little bit different. Normally you'd get a bunch of more additive stats, but you can actually get even more damage, but it requires the traps to be active. This is where, again, it differs from the more casual friendly build, where you would actually use not this over here. You'd actually be running something else. But if you run Deadly Ambush, you get to do increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by your trap skills. So this is where scaling crit and getting those like perfect rolls things definitely matters a lot, because, well, if you have no crit strike chance, it's not going to matter, how much, bonus crit strike damage you deal if the chance percent is low. So ideally, you do want to try to hit around at least 50% crit with pretty much all Diablo builds, especially if you're trying to push towards the higher tiers. But the main thing also to look at is activating certain things at the correct window. Sometimes it's better to wait for that split second on the activation of Inner Sight. When is this going to be up? When is your aspect of elements going to be up? You have to factor these in. If you play Diablo 3, think of kind of like the convention of elements on the right cycle for your rotation for the big damage. It really comes down to that, especially when you start pushing higher in the pit. The boss is essentially the hardest thing for every single build, but that's going to be kind of a skill issue at the end of the day, and try not to get hit. That's like the biggest thing, and Rogue is a relatively fast class, but again, you can see, even though this is, I don't remember what the number is at the moment, but like, as we start pushing higher in the gameplay here, things tend to hit a lot harder. That's kind of normal and to be expected in the game, but as far as running daggers or swords, honestly, it doesn't really matter that much. If you happen to have really high crit, then sword swords can be good, but a lot of times, well, specifically on the bosses, daggers can squeeze out a tiny bit more of damage, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Same thing with the bow or crossbow. With crossbow, you do get the vulnerable damage, but with the bow on the skill tree, you also do get a multiplier over here with the weapon mastery, where with bows, you get increased damage to vulnerable enemies. So again, it's kind of up to you on what your rolls are. Do you have more crit damage? Do you have more vulnerable damage? Most people will have a lot more vulnerable damage, and the uptime on this should be at like basically 100% as far as like min maxing. If you do not have a source of vulnerable like application, exploit applies, but it only lasts for 3 seconds. This is another like little tip I want to give you guys for the higher tiers of the push. You cannot just rely on exploit to actually apply vulnerability. Yeah, yes, and I can still one-shot things up until I would say like 80 to 100. Things get a lot more tanky as you start going up, but a lot of times you can still one-shot or essentially kill things within just a second, so it doesn't matter. But you need to have the application of vulnerability, whether that's in your amulet or on your rings, a chance to apply vulnerability. You need that somewhere, or you can put it in the gloves. It needs to be somewhere in your build, but you can also, if you have to, you can run the accursed touch. That is another option, because when things aren't vulnerable, this build does like 0 damage. That is a very important thing to factor in. You can even run double, and I've seen some people that were even on the leaderboards just running accursed touch. It's up to you. If I was to drop something, I'd probably drop maybe Edge Masters, but do not think Intercom is something that you should drop. That is the #1 thing that is going to get you a bunch of damage. Same thing also with Retribution. I didn't include it here because we're getting an update in literally like a day. So if that does get nerfed on the new update, then I would suggest probably not running it. But the reason why I didn't put it in like this build here, I don't know if it's going to get nerfed or not, because it's not working as intended, but that's technically the whole build anyways, with the double dipping with HeartSeeker. But anyways, that's going to be the build that if you want like the top tier notch of like the game and you want to play Rogue, this is probably going to be it, but it does require the other steps. Again, the more beginner friendly one, check that one out. That's going to be better for most people, but I wanted to go ahead and give you guys the option. If you really want to push the damage, there's a lot more things to swap. Like I said, I really do suggest trying out Poison Trap. I actually personally prefer it more, but Concealment is the other option if you want to run that. Anyways, that's going to wrap up things. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn the bell if you'd like to see more updates to more Diablo builds and guides and more gaming content. Catch you in the next one. And if you have any questions, let me know, and everything will be in the pinned comment. Peace out.